I have seen hell, not in a movie, not in music, not in a painting, not in a preacher's sermon. I was taken there. I stood on its ground. I breathed its air. I heard its sounds. And what I saw will stay with me for the rest of my life. Tonight, I am not speaking to you as a politician. I am speaking to you as a man who was shown something he never wanted to see. I saw leaders there, men who once sat in palaces, men who once commanded armies, men who once signed documents that shaped the lives of millions, men whose names once filled headlines and history books. I saw them in hell, and they were screaming. I am sharing this with you now because this is the most terrifying experience of my life. The night Jesus Christ took me to the place of eternal judgment and showed me what happens to leaders who betray the trust given to them. This is not a story I wanted to tell, but I was commanded to tell it, because what I saw is not only a warning for me, it is a warning for every leader who holds power, and for every person who may one day hold power. Listen carefully. What I am about to describe may save your soul. In the months before this happened, a question was burning inside me. I watched the news every day. I read reports from different countries. I saw what powerful leaders were doing across Africa and across the world. They were stealing billions while children went to sleep hungry. They were selling national resources for personal profit. They were signing deals that destroyed the future of their people. They were ordering violence to protect their own power. And yet, most of them seemed to win. They lived in luxury. They traveled the world in private jets. They were protected by guards, lawyers, and political alliances. Many of them grew old peacefully and died in their beds, surrounded by wealth they never earned. And I could not escape one question. Where is justice? I asked God again and again. Do tyrants ever pay for what they do? Do leaders who betray their people ever face judgment? Or is this world designed to reward evil and punish integrity? I prayed about this constantly, not politely, not carefully. I cried out in frustration. Lord, do they ever answer for what they have done? Do the powerful ever face consequences? Or is justice only a word we use to comfort the weak? I wanted an answer. I demanded an answer. And now I understand something that I did not understand then. I should have been more careful about what I demanded. On the night of February 14th, everything changed. God did not send me a message. He did not give me a sermon. He did not send someone to explain anything. He showed me. I had been fasting for 3 days. I had been praying longer and harder than usual, searching for God with a desperation I could not explain. That night, I prayed until my body could not stay awake anymore. I lay down on my prayer mat, exhausted, and I fell into a state that was not quite sleep and not quite being awake. When I opened my eyes, I was no longer in my room, and I was not alone. He was standing in front of me. Jesus, but not the gentle figure from children's stories, not the soft, peaceful face from paintings. His presence was overwhelming. His face was serious. His eyes burned with something I had never seen before. Love, and something else. Righteous authority. He spoke my name. His voice did not need to be loud. It carried weight. It carried power. He said, "You have been asking about justice. You have been demanding to know whether corrupt leaders are judged." Then he said, "Tonight, I will show you." My heart began to race. He continued, "What you are about to see, you cannot unsee. It will change you forever. Are you willing?" I hesitated. Something deep inside me understood that I was standing at a door I could never close again. But I had asked. I had demanded an answer. So I said yes. He reached out. His hand. I took it, and we began to descend. We were not walking. We were moving. Downward. Through a darkness that became heavier with every moment. At first, there was silence. A deep, crushing silence. Then I heard something far away. Moaning. Wailing. Sounds of despair. They did not sound fully human, but I knew they came from human souls. The air changed. First, an unnatural cold. A cold that went through my skin and into my bones. Then, slowly, the cold faded, and something worse replaced it. Not heat from fire, but a suffocating presence, an emptiness, an abandonment, a feeling that life itself had been withdrawn. I wanted to stop. I wanted to turn back. I tried to pull my hand away, but Jesus held me firmly, and he said, "You asked to see? Now see." And we continued downward. The sounds grew louder, the darkness became heavier, and something else filled the space around me. Hopelessness, not sadness, not fear. Hopelessness so pure and so complete that it pressed against my chest like a physical weight. I could barely breathe. Yet and then, we arrived. I do not know what I expected. Fire. Demons. Screams rising from flames. The images I had seen in movies and old paintings. What I saw was far worse. Hell is not primarily about fire. Hell is about absence. The absence of God. The absence of hope. The absence of light. The absence of any possibility that things could ever change. As we crossed what felt like a boundary, like a spiritual threshold, the weight of that absence nearly crushed me. It felt as if something essential had been removed from existence, from the world, from reality itself, from me. Imagine the worst moment of your life, the moment of your deepest loneliness, your greatest regret, your most painful loss, your most intense fear. Now imagine that moment never ending. No relief, no comfort, no distraction, no sleep, no rescue, no future. Only the certainty that it will be this way forever. That is hell, not a place created out of anger, a place created by separation, a place that exists when the only source of life, love, and meaning is completely gone. I gasped for air. My lungs struggled as if the atmosphere itself resisted life. Jesus spoke quietly beside me. This is separation from God. Forever. This is what they chose. He began to walk, and I followed him. And then, I saw them. We entered a vast place filled with figures. At first, I could not understand what I was seeing. They were all reaching, constantly reaching, hands stretching forward with desperate urgency, as if something just beyond their grasp could finally save them. Their fingers closed again and again, grabbing, clutching, straining. And then I saw what they were reaching for. Gold, diamonds, stacks of currency, jewelry, treasures beyond anything most people will ever see in a lifetime. Mountains of wealth surrounded them. But every time their hands closed around something, it turned to ash. It crumbled. It vanished. They could never hold it. They could never keep it. They could never satisfy the hunger that was driving them. Their mouths were open in permanent craving. Their faces were twisted by desire that could never be fulfilled. They had everything around them, and nothing inside them. And suddenly, I understood who they were. I could not recognize individual faces. No names were revealed. But I recognized the type, the posture, the confidence that still clung to them even in torment, the way they carried themselves. Thus, these were not ordinary people. These were leaders, presidents, ministers, high-ranking officials, people who once controlled national budgets, people who once signed billion-dollar contracts, people who once decided where money would flow and who would be left without it. Some of them still wore the torn remains of what had once been expensive suits. Some still had medals hanging on their chests, useless symbols of honor from a world that no longer existed. Jesus spoke. These are the ones who stole from their people. They lived in palaces while their citizens lived in poverty. They flew in private jets while their people walked barefoot. They filled foreign bank accounts while hospitals in their nations had no medicine. His voice was calm, but every word cut through me. Every coin they stole, that they now reach for forever. Every luxury they hoarded, they now hunger for without relief. They chose money over God. Now they have neither. I watched one figure who carried himself like a former head of state. He reached again, and again, and again. His hands closed on nothing. His mouth moved in a cry that had no sound left in it. He was crying without tears, because even tears had abandoned him in that place. I wanted to look away, but I could not, and Jesus gently guided me forward, deeper. The sound changed as we moved deeper. The endless moaning faded, and it was replaced by screaming, violent screaming, the kind of sound that comes only from extreme pain, from terror, from bodies being broken. I did not want to see what was ahead, but my eyes would not turn away. Here, the suffering was not passive. It was active. It was brutal. It was repeated. Again, and again, and again. I saw figures collapsing to the ground. I saw bodies jerking as if struck by invisible bullets. I saw souls thrown backward by unseen force. And then I understood what I was watching. They were reliving the violence they had ordered. But now, they were the victims. One figure carried himself like a military commander. Even in agony, his posture revealed authority. Again and again, bullets tore through his body. The same deaths he had authorized for others were now happening to him. Over and over, without end. Another figure, with the bearing of a head of state, was being beaten by invisible hands, dragged, struck, thrown down. But the same treatment he had approved inside secret prisons and interrogation rooms was now being carried out on him. There was no pause, no recovery, no distance between one death and the next. The moment one ended, another began. I felt my stomach twist. And then, Jesus spoke. These are the ones who murdered. He said it without anger, only truth. They signed death warrants for innocent people. They sent soldiers to destroy villages. They ordered rivals to be eliminated. They built their power on bodies. He looked at me and said, "Every life they took is now required of them. Not once, forever." The words sank into me like cold iron. The blood they spilled now flows from their own veins. The pain they inflicted now lives in their own bodies. I saw uniforms stained with blood, not the blood of their enemies, of their own. I saw symbols of rank and command still hanging from their shoulders as they screamed. Generals, coup leaders, warlords, dictators who had risen through terror, men who once ruled through fear. My knees weakened. I felt sick. But there was nothing in me to empty, only horror. Jesus stood beside me and said quietly, "This is what violence purchases. They bought power with blood. Now blood is all they have." And we moved on. The atmosphere changed again. The screaming faded. The violence disappeared. But what replaced it was somehow worse. This place was filled with people. Thousands, maybe millions. They stood close to one another, but every soul was completely alone. Invisible walls separated them. They could see others only inches away, but they could not touch them. They could not reach them, but they could not connect. Hands stretched toward nearby figures, mouths opened in silent cries for help, for comfort, for recognition, for companionship. But nothing crossed the space between them. Nothing. No voice traveled. No touch reached. No relationship survived. And suddenly I understood. This was not the suffering of pain. This was the suffering of betrayal. These were the ones who had sold out everyone who trusted them. These were the leaders who had traded their nations for personal gain. They had signed away sovereignty for private accounts. They had met in secret rooms with foreign interests. They had exchanged the future of their people for comfort, protection, and money. Now they lived inside the very essence of what they had done. Permanent abandonment, permanent separation, permanent distrust, but forever surrounded by others, forever unreachable, forever alone. Jesus spoke. These are the ones who betrayed their nations. They traded the freedom of their people for personal security. They smiled in international meetings while their citizens suffered. They called it diplomacy. They called it partnership. But it was betrayal. His voice was steady. They sold loyalty for money. Now they have neither. Only the isolation they created. I saw figures who carried themselves like diplomats. Men who once shook hands with world leaders. Men who once signed historic agreements and celebrated them with cameras flashing. Their faces were frozen into shapes that looked like polite smiles. But those smiles had become silent screams. This place felt colder than all the others. Not physically, relationally. Yet it was the absolute zero of human connection. And I realized something that struck me deeply. Betrayal does not only destroy countries, it destroys the soul of the one who commits it. Here, that destruction was complete and eternal. Jesus motioned for me to follow him, and we moved forward again. The final place was the most crowded, and somehow the most fitting. Here, the figures were bound. Chains wrapped around their arms, their chests, their legs. Heavy weights pressed down on their backs, so heavy that they could not stand upright. They could not straighten their bodies. They could not lift their heads. They were bent low, crushed, flattened under a burden that would never be removed. I watched them struggle to rise, again and again and again. But every attempt ended the same way, when they collapsed under the weight. And I understood who they were. These were the tyrants, the oppressors, the rulers who had used power to crush the weak. They had silenced opposition with fear. They had filled prisons with innocent people. They had turned entire nations into personal kingdoms, where their word was law and everyone else was expendable. Now, the same force they had placed on others was resting on them. Every freedom they had taken was now taken from them. Every voice they had silenced, their own voices were now powerless. Every prisoner they had broken, their own bodies now carried that suffering. Jesus said, "Power was given to them to serve. They used it to enslave. The measure they used to oppress is now the measure of their judgment." I saw figures who must once have stood tall, dictators who demanded obedience, generals who expected salutes, men whose presence once made rooms fall silent. Now they crawled, unable to rise, unable to resist, unable to escape. And something shocked me. The arrogance was still there. The entitlement was still there. The pride had not died. Only the power had. They were still proud souls. But now they had nothing left to be proud of. They were still entitled personalities. But now they were entitled to nothing except suffering. Jesus stopped walking. We stood where all four regions seemed to meet. The cries of hunger, the screams of violence, the silence of isolation, the groans of oppression. All of it blended into one unbearable sound. A single, endless chorus of despair. And he turned to me. Jesus looked directly into my eyes, and he asked me a question. Do you recognize these leaders? For a moment, I could not speak. My throat felt closed. My heart was pounding too hard. I finally nodded. He said, "Their faces are hidden. Their names are concealed. But you recognize them." I answered quietly, not the individuals, but the kind of people they were, the patterns, the sins, the way power was used. He nodded, slowly. Then, he said something that froze me. Every one of these people once had a moment when they could have chosen differently. Every one of them received warnings. Every one of them believed they were special. They believed judgment would never reach them. He paused. Then, he spoke my name, and he said, "If you choose their path, you will share their fate." My legs gave way. I fell to my knees. But the weight of his words crushed me more than the chains I had seen on the oppressors. I whispered, "No, I would never become like them. I would never do what they did." He interrupted me. "That is exactly what they all said at the beginning, when they were young, when they first received authority, when power first touched their hands." He knelt beside me, and his voice became both gentle and terrifying. Power is the ultimate test. It reveals what is truly inside a person. It magnifies every weakness. It amplifies every temptation. And if you are not rooted in me, if you do not live in constant surrender, power will destroy you, just as it destroyed them. Tears were streaming down my face. My body was shaking. I said, "Then how do I lead without becoming like them? How do I hold power without losing my soul?" His answer was simple. Fear God more than you fear people. Serve your people more than you serve yourself. And remember this night, every time temptation comes, return here in your memory. See their faces, hear their screams, and remember where corruption leads. Then Jesus showed me something worse than everything I had already seen. He lifted his hand, and my vision shifted. From the crowd of the condemned, one figure stepped forward, slowly, dragging chains, his body twisted in pain, his face disfigured by suffering. He was walking toward me. At first, I could not understand why my chest suddenly felt so tight, why my heart began to race out of control. And then, I saw it. I recognized the shape of his face, the movement of his eyes, the structure of his mouth, yet the way his head tilted. It was me, not who I am now, who I could become. Me, if I chose the same path. Me, if I accepted the bribes. Me, if I betrayed my people. Me, if I protected my power instead of protecting truth. Me, if I slowly became the very thing I now claim to fight. That version of me stood in hell. Bound, broken, empty. His eyes, my eyes, were hollow. There was nothing inside them except regret. His mouth, my mouth, was frozen in an endless scream. A scream that would never finish. A scream that would never be heard by anyone who could help. I screamed. Not in my mind, not in fear, out loud. A sound tore out of my chest before I could stop it. No, this is not my future. I will never become this. I refuse. Jesus placed his hand on my shoulder, and he said softly, "Good. Remember that refusal. Hold on to it. This is why I showed you this, not to condemn you, but to warn you." My entire body was trembling. The image of my own damned face burned into my mind. I knew in that moment I would never forget it. He said, "When the moment of decision comes, you must choose who you become." Jesus helped me stand. My legs barely obeyed me. I felt as if everything inside me had been broken open. He looked at me and said, "I did not show you this to destroy you. I showed you this to save you." Then he explained something that changed the way I understood everything I had seen. Many leaders walk into judgment blind. They are shocked when the consequences arrive. They never believe the warnings apply to them, but they never think their choices will finally demand an answer. He looked at me with a seriousness that reached deeper than fear. "But you have seen. You cannot claim ignorance. This is mercy. Terrifying mercy, but mercy. I love you enough to show you the truth, and I respect you enough to trust you with what you have seen." Then he said something I will never forget. "Now you must live differently, because you know what most people never see." In that moment, I understood. The terror I felt was not cruelty. It was protection. The horror I witnessed was not punishment. It was a gift. It is better to see hell now, while I still have the power to choose, than to see it later, when choice no longer exists. He said quietly, "Go back. Live. Lead. Serve. Fear God. And remember the screams, so that you never join them." We began to rise. The darkness slowly thinned. The crushing weight lifted little by little. The sounds faded, but they never disappeared completely. Even now. Sometimes, in the quiet of the night, I still hear them. The crying, the screaming, the endless despair. As light began to return, my lungs finally expanded again. It felt like coming up from deep underwater. I gasped for air, like a drowning man. Breaking the surface, life rushed back into me. But I knew immediately I was not the same person who had gone down. Jesus released my hand. He looked at me one last time and said only one word, "Remember." And then he was gone. I felt myself falling, not violently, gently, slowly, back into my body, back into my room, back into the world of the living. I woke up screaming, not in a dream, in my bed. My security team rushed into the room with their weapons, thinking an attack was happening. I could not speak. I could not explain. I could only raise my hand and wave them away. My clothes were soaked with sweat. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. My hands were shaking uncontrollably. I looked at the clock. 3:33 a.m. I did not move from that spot until morning. I could not. I lay there, staring into the darkness, replaying everything I had seen. The 4 regions, the hunger for stolen wealth, the endless violence, the isolation of betrayal, the crushing weight of oppression, and above all, my own face, walking toward me from the crowd, damned, broken, screaming. I cried until there were no tears left. Then I just lay there, shaking. When the sun finally rose, I was no longer the same man who had gone to sleep that night. For several days after that night, I told no one. Not my advisors, not my family, not my closest friends. I could not find the right words. and part of me wondered if my own mind had created everything. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was pressure. Maybe it was just a nightmare shaped by fear and responsibility. I tried to convince myself that it was not real. Then, 1 week later, something happened that silenced every doubt. A pastor from another African nation requested a private meeting with me. The meeting had been scheduled weeks in advance. There was no connection to my experience. No one had told him anything. We sat together and spoke about ordinary matters. Then, in the middle of a sentence, he stopped. Completely. Why, his face changed. His eyes widened, as if he were suddenly listening to someone else. He looked directly at me and said, "Mr. President, I must tell you something." My body went cold. He continued slowly, "God just showed me that you recently had a vision of judgment, a vision of where corrupt leaders end up." My heart began to pound. I could not speak. He said, "God wants you to know that it was real, all of it, and He wants you to share it, not to frighten people, but to warn them before it is too late." I broke down in front of a man I had just met. I told him everything: the descent, the 4 regions, the leaders, the chains, the isolation, the screams, and my own face among the condemned. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he nodded quietly and said, "God shows this to very few people. The only question now is this: what will you do with what you were shown?" I already knew the answer. From that moment on, I would not live the same way. I would not lead the same way. I would not decide the same way. Since that night, every choice I make is weighed against what I saw. When I am tempted to take money that does not belong to me, I see the figures reaching for gold that turns into ash. I remember their hunger that can never be satisfied. And I refuse. When I am pressured to use violence to solve political problems, I see the men reliving every death they ordered. I hear their screams as they experience their own executions forever. And I choose restraint. When I am offered deals that would sell out my country for personal security or foreign approval, as I see the souls trapped behind invisible walls, forever isolated, forever abandoned, forever betrayed, and I walk away. When I am tempted to silence critics, to crush opposition, to protect power instead of people, I see the tyrants bent under weights they can never escape. And I choose service instead. This is how I live now, not in paranoia, not in anxiety, not in constant terror, but in holy fear. A fear that guides, a fear that protects, a fear that keeps me from becoming what I saw. Some people say that fearing God is negative. They want a comfortable God, a God who never judges, a God who never confronts, a God who never holds leaders accountable. But I have seen where that kind of thinking leads. It leads to leaders who believe they can do anything without consequence, and it leads to hell. When the fear of God is not the enemy of love, it is the beginning of wisdom. Now I speak directly to every leader listening, every president, every prime minister, every general, every minister, every official who holds power over the lives of others. You may escape human justice. Many do. You may never see a courtroom. You may never enter a prison. You may die peacefully in your bed, surrounded by comfort and wealth. Many have. But there is a judgment you cannot escape. Every signature that sells your nation is recorded. Every bribe that fills your pocket is recorded. Every order that costs an innocent life is recorded. Every act of oppression is recorded. You will answer for all of it. Maybe not today. Maybe not in this life. But you will answer. I have seen where you will answer. And I promise you, you do not want to stand there. Right now, today, you can still choose differently. You can repent. You can change. You can begin to serve instead of steal. The door is still open, but it will not stay open forever. Choose wisely while you still can. And now I speak to the citizens. Pray for your leaders, not only for their success. Pray for their souls. The pressure they live under is immense. The temptations placed before them would shock you. The offers that come to powerful people would stagger your imagination. Pray that they fear God more than they fear public opinion. Pray that they fear God more than they fear political enemies. Pray that they choose service over self. And when leaders fall, when corruption is exposed, when injustice seems to win, do not lose hope. Justice will come. That maybe not in your lifetime, maybe not in any earthly court, but justice will come. I have seen where it comes from, and I have heard the screams of those who receive it. God is not mocked. What leaders sow, they will reap. I did not share this vision to frighten you. I shared it to warn you, to warn leaders that power has eternal consequences, to warn citizens that justice is real even when it seems absent, to remind every person listening that this life is short, unbelievably short, and what comes after it is forever. I saw hell. I saw leaders there, men who once held the same kind of power that some of you hold today. I saw their suffering. I heard their screams. I witnessed their regret, and I saw my own face among them, the face I would wear if I chose their path. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure I never become that man. I will serve my people, not exploit them. I will fear God, not public opinion. I will remember the screams and let them guide my steps. This is my commitment, made in the shadow of what I witnessed, sealed by the terror of what I saw. And now I beg you, if you are a leader, lead with integrity. If you will become a leader one day, let this warning shape you now, before power ever touches your hands. If you know leaders, share this message with them. They need to hear it. Hell is real. Judgment is real. And for now, the door is still open. Walk through it before it closes forever.